Welcome to Unhinged and Bumbled Up, where you can
join serial dater Phil,
that's me, and dating detoxer Liz,
that's me. Welcome to the world of online dating.
What can you expect in the Unhinged and Bumbled Up podcast?
Dating do's, don'ts and disasters.
What we and our guests would gladly chuck in the 2020 dating bin to be gone forever.
What real people really think about those tricky dating dilemmas.
Awesome dating trivia. You'll never know when it'll come in handy for that pub quiz.
Top tips and tricks from our awesome guest experts who luckily know a little more about dating than we do.
So if you've ever had a dating disaster,
ignore the red flags.
if your dating life is less successful than the chances of the UK coming out of lockdown next week,
then you're in the right place. Do we know what we're talking about? No! Our dating lives are both utter shite. So join us as we talk all things dating. The good, the bad, and the sorry, there's just no spark.
Hello and welcome to the Unhinged and Bumbled Up podcast. I'm Liz, he's Phil, and today we're joined by Jo Westwood. Jo is a codependency recovery coach and actually just an all-round amazing person. She's also Nottingham-based, so we've recently formed a Knots crew, and Jo's also just recently launched her Wildly Worthy recovery community. So in today's episode, we're going to be delving into what codependency means, how to set boundaries, and also learning a ton more about Jo and her amazing career as a codependency recovery coach. So Jo, thank you so much for joining us today. Do you want to start by just telling us a bit about yourself and kind of how you ended up in this kind of sphere?
Yeah, sure. So, thank you so much for having me. It's really nice to be on the pod with my Knots crew. I have been coaching and then in the self-development industry for a long time now, probably about 10 years. And how I came to being a codependency coach is I am a recovering codependent myself. So I figured out that I was codependent when I realized that I was married to someone who is narcissistic. So I figured that out first. Then I discovered that I was codependent. Then I figured out that I had really been working with people who were like codependents and people pleasers and that kind of thing for a long time already, but without really having a name for it and an understanding of it. Went through my own recovery journey and then started to just channel that through my coaching work.
That's amazing. Nice. So, Jo, to start us off, so for anyone listening who's like, what do these words mean? Can you give us kind of a pocket guide to like what is codependency in a nutshell?
But before you do that, we asked our followers what they thought codependency is.
Oh God, I hate to think what they came up with.
So our good friend that always answers our questions put not a clue. You know who.
Thanks, Wayne. Helpful contribution as always.
I think the listeners even know. But we have the inability to cope on a day-to-day basis without the emotional support of another person. It means getting too tangled with another person, losing a sense of yourself and living through them. You're a fixer and can't be happy unless your other half is happy and you think it's always your job. And let's do one more. Basing your own happiness or worth on someone else.
They're all really good answers. So that's a really good sign. I don't know if these are people that follow me and have been paying attention, or if it's just that actually there is more awareness around what codependency is, that I'm definitely seeing it like popping up a lot more online, a lot more accounts about codependency and recovering from it and all of that stuff. So yeah, that's actually really promising. They're good answers. The way that I would describe codependency is that it's an addiction to external validation and also to dysfunctional relationships. So codependency is quite often thought of just in terms of romantic relationships, usually because that's the place that it shows up for people in the most obvious way. But codependency affects all areas of your life. So if you've been brought up in an environment that made you become codependent, then you will also find, if you look a little bit deeper, that you have codependent relationships with your family, with your friends, at work, and you're probably repeating a lot of the same patterns in all of those areas of your life. So again, it's an addiction to external validation and to dysfunctional relationships. And the way that I would kind of explain the word addiction, because again, that feels like a really harsh, strong word for a lot of people. A lot of people maybe hear that and think, I'm not an addict. An addiction is anything that you do to escape yourself. So for codependent people, they escape themselves through relationships with other people, or through the validation of other people, or through fixing other people, or they just kind of they have very intense relationships where they enmesh. So we use this word enmesh, where you basically kind of become one with another person and lose your sense of self, lose your sense of identity, which is what one of the listeners said. So yeah, that is kind of how I would describe it. And yeah, again, really good answers. I'm very impressed. Well done.
Yay, listeners. Well done. I'm impressed, apart from you, Wayne.
That is super helpful. So you've talked a little bit about kind of your story in how you kind of became a codependency coach born from your own experience. So what were the kind of signs that led you to kind of come to the conclusion that you had a problem with codependency?
So for me, it was the patterns that I was repeating in romantic relationships, particularly the types of people that I was getting into relationships with. I always distinctly remember this one evening, and I was sitting, it was like midnight. I was sitting on a wall eating a pizza with my friend after a night out. And we had both married narcissistic people, which we can chat a little bit more about, because again, that might be something that people don't really understand what it is. There's kind of I think there's a common understanding or misunderstanding of what the word narcissist or narcissistic means. But we both married people who were narcissistic, but we didn't realize at the time. And we sat eating this pizza and we were saying, why do guys always put like loads and loads of effort in at the beginning, and then they just like really quickly tail off, and you're just always trying to like get them to put more effort in? It doesn't make any sense, because if you're going to be in a long-term relationship with someone, like, put less effort in at the beginning when everyone's kind of low investment, and like put more in as time goes on, as your love grows for this person, as you become more committed. Obviously, like, very deep and meaningful as we're munching our pizza and we've probably had a skinful. These profound chats come out at these times of night. Yeah, and we were just like, I don't get it. Why? It just seemed like every person we'd ever been with had always done that. What we didn't realize is what we were describing is the relationship pattern that you get when you're with someone who is narcissistic. I went to a marriage counselor at some point after that. My ex refused to come with me, which was great. Actually, I wanted to try and fix our marriage, but it was really good that he didn't come with me, because the counselor within 10 minutes told me that I was married to someone who is narcissistic. Then I went down a rabbit hole of trying to figure out what that was and what that meant, and blaming him and completely victimizing myself. And then I think through that is where I discovered the concept of codependency. And for me, it was like, being unboundaried. Like, what it looked like was, being very unboundaried, almost like becoming one with the other person, letting go of like my wants and needs and my hobbies and my interests, and just going along with what that other person wanted, moving at a really high speed in the relationship. So again, putting aside a lot of what was happening in my life for this other person, and like really just being very chaotic and uprooting my life and uprooting my plans, because the most important thing to me, and this was not something that I consciously realized, but the most important thing for me was to feel loved and validated by a romantic partner. And I was completely unable to spot and act on the red flags that I was getting in the early stages of the relationship, as that kind of initial love bombing stage was wearing off and they were becoming a different person. I would just make excuses for them, and I wasn't able to actually say, well, you're not who I started dating, or the way you're being now doesn't match up with my values, or you're not giving me what I want out of a relationship. And most of the time I just tripped from one relationship to the next. Like, I didn't even know what I wanted. I always joke that you could line up my exes and what a motley crew it would be. There's not a common thread between them, because I would just get into a relationship with anybody because I just needed the validation of the relationship, and I could kind of mold myself to whoever showed me interest. So there you go. Just there's my soul. Have at it.
Love it. Really appreciate your honesty. To be honest, Jo, I think that's really powerful. You mentioned there about boundaries, and it's come up on the show a couple of times previously about setting boundaries. It's one of my favourite topics in the universe. Can you tell us a bit more about what you mean about being unboundaried, or about setting boundaries, and why that's relevant when we're talking about codependency?
Yeah, sure. So boundaries is such a big topic, and it's such a hot topic right now, right? It's so intertwined with so many of the bigger discussions that we're having, almost like at a societal level, around, consent and the Me Too movement and all of that stuff. Boundaries is all tied up with that. Boundaries on a personal level, especially for people who are codependent and people pleasers, people who kind of identify maybe even as empaths or intuitives. They're a ninja level skill. People think that where you start with unpicking those types of behaviors, codependent behaviors, people pleasing behaviors, is with boundaries. And I always say to my clients, boundaries are a ninja level skill. You cannot do boundaries until you have got a good level of self-worth, a good foundation of self-worth, and you have got the skill of direct communication. When you put those two things together, you can do boundaries. So where a lot of people trip up with boundaries, again, particularly codependent people, is a boundary comes out when you've been pushed, or only when it's been crossed. Or only when you've got so much like resentment and frustration built up that it kind of comes out in an emotional outburst. And then it's probably going to sound unreasonable, even if the boundary itself isn't unreasonable. Even just the way you say it or the way you present it is unreasonable. And when you only do boundaries like that, then most of the time you're being unboundaried, which means that you're just going with everybody else's flow. You're not letting people know what works for you, what doesn't work for you. And so then in that way, you actually train people to kind of walk all over you. You train people that if you give them an inch, they can take a mile. And so when you can put that good foundation of self-worth in place, and you can learn the skill of direct communication, and you can start communicating, you feel worthy enough to communicate your boundaries up front with people. So this is like, pretty much from the moment you start speaking with people on dating apps, you just find ways. And this is, again, the thing, because I think I say boundaries and, right from the moment you start speaking to someone, and I know people listening are going to be thinking that it's going to make them sound like a nag, or they're going to be harsh. They're like laying down the law. The first message is going to be like, don't do this, don't do that. It's like, no, of course it's not that. But you can, when you've developed that skill, you can just find ways to, like, very easily, casually, in like a way that it's going to be received well, your boundaries, what works for you, what doesn't work for you, around, whether it's like the pace of a relationship, what you're looking for, what your values are, letting someone know if they've overstepped a little bit, and that's okay. You're going to give them a chance to reel it back in, and then they can do with that what they will. They either respect it or they don't. And you have to have the self-worth to be able to maintain the boundary, which is the hardest part.
Yeah, because we did ask the followers, do you struggle to set boundaries? Now, this is the percentage guessing. How many of our followers do you reckon said yes?
80.
Liz, what's your guess?
Yeah, I'm going to say high, maybe like 70.
In between both of you, 75% said yes, they struggle to set boundaries. So if that is you in that 75%, just listen back to what Jo just said.
But I think, Jo, that's a really nice way of thinking about boundaries, is not because a boundary, as you say, conjures up an idea that you only, the dog only barks when someone steps on the territory. But actually you can do preemptive things like put up fences to make it clear where the edges of what's acceptable for you are. And I think kind of something that's linked in with boundaries is just about your needs and preferences. And they're a way of expressing your needs and preferences, which imply what your boundaries are. So, for example, often when in days gone by, when I would be dating, I would say something like, I really like my own space, so it's really important to me to have time alone, or, I prefer that somebody lets me know before they're going to call me or call round. And that is a way of expressing a need or a preference, which isn't like waiting for somebody to trip up and then going, don't do that. It's just more about clearly stating your preferences in the relationship.
Yeah, exactly. Or letting somebody call you constantly without letting you know first, and then getting frustrated because you haven't set the boundary. So why would they know that doesn't work for you? Then you feel bad. So then you don't want to set a boundary. And then do you look mean for doing it? And it's like,
or you're just really stroppy with them on the phone, but they don't understand why you're being stroppy with them on the phone, because as far as they're concerned, they haven't done anything wrong.
Exactly. And it's just such a communication mess when that happens. So actually being able to find those ways to, put your boundaries in up front and just like weaving them into conversation in an easy way is it just saves so much like hassle and turmoil along the way. And also, if you're paying attention and you're alert, you will see if the other person is paying attention, because you will see if they're respecting what you've asked for, they're respecting your needs and desires, and if they do like make a mistake, they should catch it themselves, because they'll be like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, I called you by accident, can we speak later? Instead of like just calling you like, I told you I don't like this. This is like, why are you doing this? Yeah. You can see then that they're not paying attention. So then again, it's like, oh, okay, is this a red flag? Or like, yeah, anyway.
That's super helpful. And so talk us through a little bit just about your program, your coaching program, because I'm really interested, because I think as you're talking, a lot of people will be like, yes, hello, that's me, like tick, 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 tick. Mm-hmm. What is the process like for thinking about changing if you do recognize yourself as a codependent, or what does that kind of recovery process look like?
Okay, yeah, thank you so much for asking me about this. I'm super excited because I have just launched a recovery community. So in the past I've done like one-to-one coaching and group coaching, and I still do some of that, but my kind of focus now in my work is this recovery community, because I found that the most effective way for codependent people to recover is in community with other people, because codependency is exhausting, confusing, and isolating. And so to be able to just be in a group of people who get you, they understand, because they've thought all the same thoughts as you, felt all the same feelings, they've done all the same like batshit crazy stuff as you. I always say, look, no judgment from me, because I've been there, done that, got the codependent t-shirt. It's just really nice to be able to walk into a virtual room like that and feel that you can say, I'm feeling this, I'm feeling anxious about this, I'm feeling stressed about this, I'm confused about this, I'm really like low in self-worth today because da-da-da. And you don't have to justify. Everyone just understands because they've all felt the same way. Yeah. So that's what's really nice about the community that I'm creating. The process that we work through is, as I mentioned before, it's really about building those foundations of self-worth. Something that I love to say, I love a visual metaphor. So if you think of your life as a house, then your confidence is like the lovely front door, it's like the beautiful gallery wall, it's the lovely paint job, it's all the trendy furniture. You can have all of that, and the foundations are shit. The foundations are your self-worth. That's your self-worth. So you can have confidence and charisma. And in fact, codependent people quite often are very confident and charismatic, because if your sense of self-worth depends on other people falling in love with you, like, you need to learn how to do that, how to make them fall in love with you. So you need to be confident and charismatic. So you can have all of that stuff, but the foundations can be very, very shaky. So that's what we work on, is those foundations of self-worth. We work on like reclaiming time and space back for yourself. We work on you rediscovering who you are, perhaps discovering who you are for the first time in your life, figuring out what your values are. What do you want out of life? What do you want from your career? What do you want from relationships? And then, of course, we work on the more external things like direct communication and boundaries, and, working through, well, what does it look like if you do start dating, and supporting each other through that as well. So yeah, that's kind of like the process and how it works, how it feels. And yeah, it's a really good vibe already.
Facts about dating.
This segment is called Facts About Dating, where we increase our knowledge slightly and learn a little fun fact about dating. We also ask the guest to find a fun fact.
So we've reached the part of the show where we learn something new. Now, Liz, have you got your facts?
Yes, and I love it. So this fact actually came from Jo's insider intel into the dating world, right? So this is like, the bit in The Wizard of Oz where they look behind the curtain. That's what this is, right? Okay. So this is known in the dating world as the creepiness rule, which I love. So there is apparently a mathematical formula for how to work out what the age range of people that you can date is without it being creepy. Okay, so I'm going to tell you what the formula is. So I'm 35, which is not so easy to apply this formula to without a calculator. So we're going to do it based on Phil and Jo's age. I've just divulged your age, Jo. I hope you don't mind.
No, that's absolutely fine. I'm always telling people I'm almost 35.
Perfect. So the rule is as follows. So for the lower limit, i.e. the youngest person you should date, you halve your age and then you add 7. So if you're 34, you would halve that and get 17 and then add 7, which is 24. So the youngest person that Phil or Jo should date should be 24. If it's 23, it's creepy.
It's creepy.
And then for the upper limit, it's kind of flipped. So first you subtract 7 and then you double your age. So if you subtract 7 from 34, you would get 27. This is like tough on my brain. You get 27, then you double it. So the oldest that somebody, Jo or Phil, should date is 54. If it's 55, it's creepy. Wait, have you just noticed a problem with my maths?
No, not with your maths, but with that result.
That's a big range.
It is.
It's a really big range.
My mum is 56. Sorry, everyone. Sorry, Mum. I didn't.
Sorry,
yeah,
Mrs. Ward.
But yeah. So that's like
that is dating somebody same age as your mum. That's quite a big range, huh?
Yeah.
I'm also slightly reassured about this because Breadcrumb James, who you've heard all about previously, was 26, but I found that out quite late and was like, "Oh my god, this is really uncomfortable." But apparently, it's fine, not creepy.
It's not creepy.
26 is fine.
It's not creepy. So,
creepy.
Jo, moving on to your facts.
Okay, so just a very quick note. I do have a friend called Sexy Sandra who is 54 and she's a total babe. Okay. So completely
set them up.
I think she's out of my age range, wasn't she?
No, she's at your upper limit.
54.
It's the date.
Hi, Sexy Sandra. If you're listening.
Call me.
I'm really hoping that the sexy is genuine and not ironic.
No, it is genuine. Yeah, she's a babe. And I recently went on a date with someone that was 25 and I felt really creepy. So
it's allowed.
I think he had a bad haircut and I made some reference to New Kids on the Block and he had no idea what I was talking about. It was really awkward.
The worst.
I had to Google it
Yeah.
and send him a photo of New Kids on the Block.
Yeah, I think you can probably tell it's creepy when you have to like explain cultural references.
Yeah.
Like, not the
Yeah.
one. Anyway, okay. So from a very fun lol fact to a kind of scary fact. Sorry, everyone. So this is from an amazing woman called Dr. Ramani Devasula. She is a professor of psychology, a clinical psychologist, and an expert in the field of narcissism. And as we spoke about earlier, when we talked about the way that we generally talk about narcissism is people who have narcissistic personality styles and narcissistic traits. She estimates that 10 to 15% of the population are narcissistic in that way. So yeah,
Wow,
that is
a
like,
lot. There's a lot of
Yeah.
people.
It is a lot of people. It's much lower for people who are actually diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, which is like very, far gone, really like at the high end of that narcissistic scale. But yeah, it's a really hard thing to pin down. But she's an expert in the field. She has an incredible book called Should I Stay or Should I Go, which is really good for anybody that feels like anybody that might feel like they're in a narcissistic relationship. It's really going to help you figure out, should you stay or should you go? But from her extensive expertise, she estimates 10 to 15% of the population.
Wow.
Kind of terrifying,
That
guys.
is kind of terrifying, I'm not gonna lie. I'm kind of glad I'm taking a break.
Yeah.
So, Phil, have you got a fact?
Yes. So, going back to the point of taking it slow, the longer you spend dating somebody before marrying them, the less likely the marriage is to end in divorce. So this comes from Andrew Francis and Hugo Myelon, sorry if I pronounce your name wrong, of Emory University, conducted in 2014, involving 3,151 people, and found that couples who had dated for 3 or more years before proposing were almost 40% less to divorce compared to those that had dated for less than 1 year.
That's really
that really makes sense. Yeah, I got married after 8 months. So
mine was
proved the rule.
I got engaged after 6 months.
Yeah, I got engaged after 8. I think we've been together 2 and a bit years before we got married, but a year of that was spent traveling around Australia, so it doesn't really count because it's not like real life, is it? Like you can have a fun time traveling with anyone. Being on TV, exactly. So I feel like you can kind of wipe out that year's worth of dating because it's not very representative of what real life is likely to be like. Back to the questions.
Can you answer this?
Now we're back to the real reason why you're all here, asking our guests the questions and getting the answers.
You touched on narcissism earlier.
Yes.
Do you want to go more into detail about it? Because like you say, it is used quite a lot and people do use it in the wrong sense, I would say.
Yes.
So, yeah, if you want to go ahead and tell us all about narcissism.
Yeah. Okay. Settling, guys. About to do my TED Talk. So first up, there is a thing called narcissistic personality disorder. I am not a doctor. I'm not a psychiatrist or a clinical psychologist. So narcissistic personality disorder is something that could be diagnosed by a psychiatrist. It is like a mental health disorder that you can get support for in that way. Not a lot of people are diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder because of the nature of narcissism. So there are a lot more people out there who have narcissistic traits or a narcissistic personality style, but they're not at their level where they're going to be diagnosed with a personality disorder. But like narcissistic traits and style is much more common. So when I talk about narcissism, that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about NPD. So it's just always important to kind of cover that off. Like, it's so important to be specific around this type of language, because in like Instagram meme culture, like the word narcissism is really thrown around a lot. So there's one corner of the internet that thinks that narcissism is just like anybody that's ever pissed you off.
Yeah, or anyone that's like a little bit cocky or doesn't like fully respect your opinion. Like everyone, like 90% of people are there for a narcissist.
Yeah. And then there's another corner of the internet that thinks narcissism is just like really vain people who take loads and loads of selfies. And actually, narcissism is not really either of those. Well, I mean, a narcissist will almost certainly piss you off, but it's definitely not everybody that's ever pissed you off. Narcissism, it comes from, again, like similar to codependency, a fundamental lack of self-worth. But the key identifier for somebody who is narcissistic is that they lack in empathy. And the way that you will know if you are in relationship with a narcissist, and I say in relationship, not in a relationship. So you could have a narcissistic boss, you could have a narcissistic parent, a narcissistic sister. It's not necessarily just a romantic partner. Is that you will go through that it's a 3-stage process when you're in relationship with them. So there's the initial phase, which is commonly known as love bombing. Which is in like clinical language, we would say it's the over-evaluation stage. Then there's the devaluation stage, and then there's the discard stage. So the over-evaluation stage or the love bombing stage usually lasts for a few weeks or months. And if you've been through it, you know it. It's where you like Liz is putting her hand up. Liz is putting her hand up and giving us the eyes.
Oh, I've got such a specific example and I can't say what it is because I'll get in trouble, but this is like resonating big time.
Yeah, so what that commonly looks like is you meet somebody and it's like they're your soulmate. They like everything that you like. They're like the most amazing person in the world. They put you up on a pedestal. You just feel like an absolute goddess in their presence. They always want to be around you. Like it moves the relationship along at warp speed. Like having, keys pressed into your hands after like 2 weeks of dating them and telling you that they want you to move in and they see a future together and they want to marry you. And it's like, it's intense. Again,
just a quick
you've
question.
been through it, you know it. Yes.
Do you think the pandemic has increased love bombing due to the fact of all these turbo relationships going on?
I don't know. Okay, so this is quite interesting. Can I come back to this?
Yep, we'll come back to this. Carry on with the TED Talk.
Yeah. Can I circle back around? Because I've got some thoughts on this.
Yep, yeah. We can cover this.
Really good question, though. Really, really good question, because it has definitely affected relationship dynamics between people who desperately need validation, which on like two sides of the same coin is both codependent people and narcissistic people, right? Yep. Just going to say I got a lot more clients over the pandemic. So that's the love bombing stage. That's the over-evaluation stage. Then the devaluation stage is where all that stuff that you experienced in the love bombing starts to be pulled away and chipped away. So if they were very affectionate, they start being less affectionate. If there was a lot of physicality and sex, all of a sudden that starts to go away. If they were very complimentary, you realize they're just not complimenting you as much. If they wanted to spend loads of time with you, you realize, oh, they don't want to spend so much time with me. I actually feel like a burden all of a sudden. And they just start to chip away at you and devalue you. Another very common aspect of this stage is being gaslit. So where somebody is acting one way, and then when you bring up that behavior, denying it and kind of making out that it's you're crazy, they're not really doing that. So when you say, oh, it seems like, things we're not as close as we were, or we don't have as much affection between us, they'll be like, I don't know what you're talking about, I hug you all the time, and you literally can't remember the last time that they hugged you, for example. And again, if you've been gaslit, you know it, and you don't need me to explain to you. And then and what that does is it kind of and then you also get intermittent rewards. So you'll get, when narcissistic people sense you figuring out what's going on, or sense you being drained and pulling away and maybe wanting to leave the relationship, then they'll take you for a amazing luxurious weekend away, and they'll give you this kind of short intense hit of what the love bombing was like, and it keeps you kind of like how you train a dog. You train them with treats in the beginning. They get a treat every time they come back in the beginning, and then you give them less and less, and they just learn then to come back when you call them, whether they get a treat or not. And that's basically what's happening to you when you're going through this relationship phase with a narcissistic person. And eventually that just makes you exhausted. You lose your sense of self. It's absolutely crushing. And then when they can't extract anything more from you, they can't extract what they need from you, which is emotional connection, because they struggle with empathy. They don't have a sense of empathy. They need your emotional source. Then you get discarded. And again, very familiar for you if you've been in a relationship with a narcissist. They will move on to somebody else as if you never even existed at warp speed. So that's the hallmarks of a relationship with a narcissist.
That's super helpful.
And yeah, usually when I explain that, a lot of light bulbs start going on above people's heads.
Well, with that, we asked the followers a question that you sent in. Have you ever been love bombed? And then what percentages, you two?
I think it's high, but I have a follow-on question based on this. So I think I think I'm going to go about 70% again. We're going to say yes.
Jo?
I was going to say 65. Sounds like I'm just copying Liz. But I'd say 60, 65. I think that the amount of people that have actually been love bombed is higher, but I think people don't realize they've been love bombed.
Well, 86% said they have been love bombed.
Oh.
So people are realizing, people are seeing it. I did put the little definition
no.
underneath, so people kind of...
Okay.
So my follow-up question is about love bombing specifically, because what I'm interested in is whether love bombing is always a red flag for a potential narcissist, or the start of a relationship with a narcissist, or whether some degree of love bombing happens in relationships that are not with a narcissist, because I recognize it from previous relationships, and I wouldn't say that person is a narcissist based on the definition that we've discussed, but I definitely recognize this kind of very intense declarations of adoration and these very lavish gifts or acts of service or whatever they are, which then just kind of go boo over a couple of weeks or months, and don't necessarily lead to the degree of kind of then chipping away and withdrawal, but certainly kind of aren't sustainable in the long term.
Yeah, so I would say on the worst end of the scale, it's a red flag that you're with a narcissist. On the kind of best end of the scale, it's a red flag that you're in a relationship with someone who's very immature, because they just have got no idea that is not going to be sustainable unless they can sustain that. If that's their relationship style, obviously that's got to work for you as well. But if that's just their relationship style, they're super intense, they're super loving, they love giving you gifts and acts of service, and they know that they can maintain that through a relationship, and they fully intend to do that, cool, awesome, where are you? Give me a call. But actually I wouldn't like that. I'm quite introverted. I like a lot of space too. So, yeah, maybe just that one day a week, call me. But yeah, I think actually if it didn't then sort of devolve into abuse, it's probably just somebody that's kind of immature and doesn't really realize what it is to be in a mature, adult, sustainable relationship, and perhaps is mistaking all of that sort of Disney stuff in the beginning that isn't really real for connection, when actually we know all the relationships that we value in our lives the most are low key because the connection is deep and it's real and
it
it's
takes
long lasting
time to build that, and you can't just like magic that in a couple of dates with somebody and be like, wow, that's amazing, we have this great connection. Yeah, because you basically don't really know each other yet.
Yeah, and it could also be like a sign of someone's insecurity, which is going to sound super harsh, so please don't at me, but is also potentially a sign of immaturity, because if you're at that level of insecurity where you're trying to like force a connection with someone, perhaps because you don't believe that you're worth it if you don't do all of those things for them, then, and you're not working on that, again, it's like not a person I could be in a relationship with. Like, I talk about people being healthy, I'm doing air quotes around that, and what I mean by healthy is that they know how they're fucked up and they're working on it.
Yeah.
Like, it's all relative, right? There are very few of us that come out of this life unscathed by whatever shit went on, usually in our childhoods. But like, I want to know that you know what that is and you're working on it, and you're not going to burden me with it, or it's not going to come out in some weird way, like, you know, buying shitloads of lavish gifts and then you can't actually maintain that beyond the third date.
Yeah, like, know what your skeletons in the closet are. It doesn't mean you don't have to have any. You just need to not have any.
You can start clearing them out, like one bone at a time, and get rid of them like that. But as long as you're doing that.
Yeah, but I totally agree. I think that's a really interesting point, that love bombing is not necessarily a sign of narcissism. It's a sign that something is maybe a bit off. But I do think, and we talked about this in the Disney episode, that we're kind of conditioned to go, oh wow, like they've fallen instantaneously in love with me, this is brilliant, run with it, when actually we should probably be going, there's something odd here, I'm gonna maybe be cautious.
Yeah, and I think just a final point on that is like, what is it in you that wants or needs that from a person? What like part of you is that, what missing part of you is that filling, because you really like the idea that someone has so instantly and intensely fallen for you. That is probably a red flag for you, that there's kind of something missing that maybe you need to work on, that you need to fill up.
Yeah.
Because it's obviously giving you something if you're enjoying that, rather than thinking, you know, again, at best, oh, this is a fun novelty, we'll see if you can keep it up. And at worst, like, gross, give me some space. Like, I need to step back from this.
The 2020 bin.
This segment is called the 2020 bin, basically the modern room 101. Each week we'll be asking our guest to chuck something they hate about dating in the 2020 bin and give us a reason why.
Okay, so we are on to the 2020 bin. Jo, tell us what you would like to chuck in the 2020 bin to be gone forever.
Okay, so what I want to put in the 2020 bin is having to move in with someone that you've just started dating, because you have to decide whether you want to see them for the next 6 months or not. And therefore you have been forced into a bubble with them.
Pandemic hell, like turbo relationships. And I also think like this whole thing about you can't skipping the whole dating stage and going straight to eating spaghetti bolognese on the sofa in your joggers stage.
Yes.
Like what is I'm not up for this.
So some of these relationships may work. Like some of them may work after the pandemic's over and stuff like that. But I feel personally they're very, very rushed, and you don't know everything about that person. You don't know their hobbies, what they like to do, how they are at weekends, if they go out drinking quite a lot with their mates or anything like that, because you have been literally stuck in a house with them for 6 months.
Yeah,
so, well, and also it's
that fast tracking.
You know, it's a lot of pressure to put on a very new relationship just because of the way people live in their homes.
Yep.
There are a lot of like very different standards going on, and to have to find that out with no real foundation and nothing to no substance to negotiate on, it's really not the one, is it? It's like you don't want to find out after 2 months that your new boyfriend leaves his dirty pants on the bathroom floor, and if you don't pick them up, they don't get picked up. Like,
No.
not the one.
And you don't want to find out after potentially more than 12 months of dating somebody that somebody is, I don't know, vile when they get drunk at weddings or whatever it is. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, there are so many, or like clap when the plane lands. Like, there are so many things that you can't know about somebody.
Joe's laughing. Do you clap when the plane lands, Joe? Do you clap when the plane lands?
I don't, but I find those types of, like, you know, those little things that give people the ick that people are like so harsh and mean about. I find them really, really funny.
We're there.
I don't.
These things are deal breakers for me.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. Like, I find it really hilarious. I don't think I have many of those, but I find other people's really funny. It's brilliant when people are like, "Oh," I had friends once that were like, "Oh, he wore women's deodorant," and it's just like, I'm like, "Well, I wear men's deodorant." So hashtag no judgment.
But yeah, totally agree. There are some universal things, and there are also some specific things that you just cannot know about somebody from having a pandemic relationship. And I feel like we need to just maybe reserve judgment until we've seen the full gamut of experience.
Going in the bin. Yep, it's going in the bin.
Yeah.
So I just want to do something before it goes in the bin.
This item has successfully landed in the bin.
Even though we added 40 minutes to the flight time so that we could make sure it came in on time.
Yeah.
Smart.
So that concludes the first part of this double episode. The next part, or the next episode, is up right after this. So continue listening, and depending on what you're listening on, it should automatically play. If not, then remember it's there and listen at a later date. But as always, this content is invaluable. And if you enjoyed this part, you will definitely enjoy the next.